Hi, I'm Stephen Van Tassel. You're listening to Living the Wildlife, discussing all things related to vertebrate pest control as part of the Pest Geek Podcast family. This is the disclaimer for Wildlife Control Consultant and Pest Geek Podcast for Living the Wildlife Podcast. Always follow national, state, provincial, and local laws when using pesticides and or other control methods to manage pests. Wildlife Control Consultant, LLC, Pest Geek Podcast, Living the Wildlife Podcast, Stephen M. Van Tassel, or their or his affiliates are not responsible for followers' use of the information provided here. Hi everyone, Stephen Van Tassel here, Wildlife Control Consultant, bringing another episode of Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek Podcast family. Hey, glad to have you on board. I hope you're doing well. I'm doing a podcast here, sort of not quite midweek, but pretty close. So I'm got some traveling to do and had some time, so therefore I thought I would get this out while I had a little bit of a break. Do take a few moments, if you would, to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell. And if you could give us a 5-star review, we would be most grateful for that. You can also reach out to me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. That's wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Love to hear your thoughts, comments, suggestions for other shows. And of course, even if you have criticisms, I'll hear those as well. You can also join us on the Pest Geek Podcast Facebook group. We'd love to have you there. You can be a place where you can discuss issues about your business and about other topics in that particular area of like-minded individuals with professionals. So that would be great if you would do that. Well, this week, I thought I would talk about a particular book that I read a while back, and it was kind of a powerful book. So let me pull that up for you. And so the topic this week is a little bit about communication and how we need to work on that, and how do we have what's known as fierce conversations. Now, that isn't the term I use. That's actually the title within the book that I read. But the fact of the matter is a lot of people do have challenges when it comes to communication. And so, and I would agree that sometimes what people mean when, well, we're having trouble communicating, what they really mean by that is that they're having trouble convincing the other person to their point of view. That is not what this is about. I mean, that's a lot of a modern, guru type stuff. If we could just communicate more, all of our problems would go away. No, that's simply not true. The fact of the matter is, a lot of times we're communicating and we're angry at each other precisely because we know what each other believes and we just profoundly disagree. It's not an information issue. Nevertheless, we have to all agree that there are many conversations where people are actually talking past one another and they're failing to be forthright and honest to get to the deep-seated issues so that the truth can win out and the relationship can move forward. That's a different thing altogether, and that's what this book is about, is how do we have those difficult conversations with people in a manner that is both honest with yourself, respectful of the other person, and done with an attempt to try to find progress or harmony or a proper resolution. Just consider, relationships with your spouse, consider relationships with your colleagues, and consider your relationships with your employees. In my limited experience in the industry, even though I've been in it for decades at this point, but I'm still limited in the sense that there's a lot of experiences I haven't had. The fact is that I think that our industry really has difficulty communicating with people. And I think part of the problem with that is that we have a lot of people that are drawn to this industry because they like to be alone. They don't like to be in an office. They're not wordsmiths. They're get it done people, like to work with their hands, and they struggle, of course, with customers. Now, they may do better with customers because they're motivated by the paycheck. But when it comes to their colleagues and perhaps their employees, they can become little tyrants. And where they will, if I disagree with you, I must hate you as well. And that's certainly been the case for many people that I've encountered that I've disagreed with. They can't disagree with you and still be friends. They have to disagree with you and hate you at the same time. And in some cases, it's actually destroyed relationships. And so this particular book, Fierce Conversations, addresses some of this. So why don't we get into that? I hope I piqued your interest on that. So here's the problem, right? So how do we handle tough conversations? How do you deal with situations where you need to have that difficult talk with an employee, maybe a valuable employee, that perhaps their behavior or their workmanship hasn't reached or hasn't been maintaining company standards? Perhaps you're seeing a pattern of behavior that's concerning you and you're afraid where it's going to lead. Maybe there's a topic with a spouse or your children that you know if you bring it up, it's going to be fireworks. Maybe it's about an in-law, and they're going to be all geared up to defend this in-law when you know that there's something seriously wrong here, and they're just sort of playing the identity game. You know, this is my tribe, and I've got to defend my tribe come hell or high water. You know, you might have met people who do that. You know, it's like my country, right or wrong. It's like where they defend their nation even when the nation's done egregious things. We all want patriotism. We all want people to love their country. But when you're so blinded by that patriotism that you can't see the mistakes that the country has made, there's just something wrong with that. And people do that with their relationships. And so the book deals with how do we approach these types of issues. How about something more subtle where you need to change the culture of your company? Now, I know most of you don't have employees. Nevertheless, what's the culture like in your family? What's the culture like in your relationships? Is it positive? Is it enhancing people? Are they becoming better individuals, more virtuous, more moral, more admirable in their behavior? And if that's not the case, then sometimes these tough conversations have to be done, right? And maybe put something concrete here. Maybe your spouse just isn't maybe cleaning the house the way you think he should. Well, how do you discuss that without destroying the marriage or the relationship? How do you tell the truth? And I put that in, that truth is in quotes, because one of the principles of the book is trying to help you understand that you need to be truthful, but you also have to recognize that your understanding of the truth may not be the entire truth. Nor can it could also be possible that you don't have the truth in its objective sense. You have sort of your truth, your perspective, but you're missing something. And you have to be sensitive to that. So let's get on with the particular book. So here it is. It's by a lady named Susan Scott, and she owns a company called Fierce Inc. And so she's basically a consultant that works with corporations and executives to help them work through communication challenges that they're having in their businesses or in their personal lives, in their corporate structure. It's been through 39 printings, which is just, that is just amazing, right? Understand that the first printing of a book essentially pays for the book. Every printing after that is essentially, other than the actual cost of printing the book, is all profit, unless they're doing a lot more advertising. 39 printings, that's just a monster seller, okay? That's just amazing. So she's revised this particular book, and this is the one that I read. I read the revised and updated version. And so notice what it says, for those of you listening. It says, Fierce Conversations, Achieving Success at Work and in Life, One Conversation at a Time, by Susan Scott. National bestseller. She's revised it, and so this is the particular book. It was last published in 2017. So it's not that old, only 6 years old with the year that I'm recording this particular podcast. So she begins by talking about the challenges about the truth. And I've already hinted at this already. And that is when you have, let's say something angers you. You have an employee who's done something and it's just really ruffled your feathers. It's just enraged you. You need to step back before you ream the person out, because you have to ask the question, do you truly have an accurate understanding of what the worker did? That's the difference between your truth and the truth. And this is a quote, for those of you who can't see the screen. It says, all conversations are with ourselves, and sometimes they include other people. So her point is that you're ruminating on this, like, I know what this person did. I'm going to really have to ream them out. And you're having this conversation with yourself. And on occasion, you'll actually reach out and talk to the person that it actually affects and it actually deals with. And we need to be sure that we have this opening, because there's two responses. You can explode on your employee, or you can bury this anger. And let me tell you, sooner or later, it's going to come out. And it's going to come out at the wrong time where you don't have all the justification. So her point is that you need to have these conversations with people that are difficult, but you need to do it in a manner that you don't destroy the relationship and you actually get at the truth. So she provides some strategies here. And so this is how you sort of frame the issue. And she's asking, when you're talking with this other individual, have you truly heard their perspective? Or are you so dedicated on getting your points across, you haven't understood? And she points out that it's important that people want, if nothing else, they want to be understood. Because that gives a level of dignity. Now, I know some of you may be saying, oh, Stephen, I'm so tired of this touchy-feely stuff. Now, just hear me out here. I'm not a very touchy-feely person, but it is important, I hope we would all agree, we need to be concerned about the truth. As painful it is, one of the analogies I use when I give talks, I said, I stand on the scale and I'm offended all the time. Right? Because the scale is giving me a number that I don't like. Now, that's the truth, whether I like it or not. Right? Now, obviously, that's an inanimate object I'm dealing with, right? But we need to care about the truth, but we also need to make sure that our truth is accurate. Just because we think it's true doesn't make it true. And many times in our industry, people, because they're type A personalities, they want to be in control. Sometimes there's baggage with people they've had in their past, and they're like, I'm going to make sure I'm number one. I'm always going to win. I'm going to crush the opposition, blah, blah, blah. And they might be right, they might be accurate, but they destroy the relationship in their wake. And that's not what you want to do. You want to uphold the truth, because that is important. But you also want, to the extent that you can, maintain the relationship. And part of the way you do that is hearing the other person without interrupting them and truly listening. The second principle is, have you doubted, truly doubted, questioned your own perspective? Now, perhaps the worker did do something wrong. But do you have the full context as to maybe why they did something wrong? Did they break the rules, let's say company policy, but did they do so for an understandable, may not be justified, that's not my point, it may not be justified, but it may soften the point that at least you knew that their heart was in the right place or their mind was in the right place. It just still violated something it wasn't enough of an exception to violate your rule. Because understand that when we're criticizing people, we're hardwired to defend ourselves. And she uses this phrase, defend, deny, deflect. Not only do the people that we criticize behave that way, we do it ourselves. I know I'm right. I know what I'm saying is true. And you defend, deny, deflect. Well, I thought it was this way. And then you try to excuse yourself. And she's trying to say, look, check yourself and make sure when you have these honest conversations with people, or fierce conversations, these are conversations over important issues. It's not about, oh, what's the weather like today? Important issues. Are you sure you're checking yourself? And one of the things she asks you to do, and that is, what are you pretending not to know? And her point here is that sometimes we know our perspective is incomplete, but that interferes with what we want to do. We want to ream this person out, or we want to just bury the conversation. And what are we pretending not to know? Because we just don't want to know that maybe we need to fire this person. Maybe we knew that we shouldn't have hired him to begin with, but we were desperate and hired him anyways, and now we're trying to fight ourselves and not acknowledge the fact we made a mistake. So it cuts both ways, right? So what are you pretending not to know? She continues and points out, she says, nothing is more dangerous than an idea if it's the only one you have. And her point is that we have to be careful of this sort of bulldog attitude towards our own perspective or our own ideas, that if we're truly trying to build community within our company, within our relationships, we have to be willing to listen to other people's ideas. And again, that's very hard for people who are type A personalities. If you're self-employed, you are a type A personality. Don't tell yourself that you're not. You are. You want to win. You have to run your business. You've got to be tough. Otherwise, there's no way you can survive in your business. But the danger to that positive trait is that you also think you're right all the time, and you shut down comments from your employees, comments from your family. You know, your spouse may be saying you work too much. Well, I'm just trying to feed my family, right? What are you trying to pretend not to know? Okay, so we need to be open to our ideas, and this is something she spends a lot of time on, the importance of not getting so tunnel vision in your own perspective, and that's an attitudinal check that you've got to work with. So one of the strategies she also talks about, that when you're trying to have a deep conversation with someone, one of the techniques that you can do is do what's called a mineral rights conversation. Now, how she defines mineral rights is that this is a period of time where you ask permission of the other person to start asking a series of questions to try to really delve down to the root issue, so that you can fully understand the other person's perspective. Now, not all conversations require this, but there is a technique. I believe it was a Japanese guy. His name escapes me. But nevertheless, the idea was that whenever you're thinking about something, wanting to do something, ask the 5 whys. Why do you want to do this? Well, why number 1? And then why do you want to do that? And then the idea being is once you get to the 5th why, you've basically run out. You're getting to the rock bottom reason of why you're doing something. Well, the same way here, when you're communicating with someone who is that you're trying to have a difficult conversation with, sometimes you've got to get to those root issues. And that's a mineral rights conversation. So it's basically being transparent. And all you do is you don't comment on what they said. You're asking questions to be sure you truly understand their perspective, but you're getting into some deep stuff. Now, all conversations, as I said before, don't have to go this deep, but sometimes when you're like, well, what's causing you to behave this way? Or why do you think we're having this conflict? Things like that. Those are going to be situations where you have to get down to the deep level. How do we distinguish between feedback and confrontation? So you as an owner, if you have employees, or if you're a parent with children, you are going to need to provide some feedback to provide some corrective education. Now, feedback is not condemnation. It's not punishment. It's sort of like a coach. You're trying to reflect on this person's behavior or actions to help them understand maybe there was a better way of going about doing it. So she gives, how do we differentiate between feedback and confrontation is where you are rebuking someone for what they're doing. And so she has these ideas. So a feedback is when you're talking to someone about a behavior that hasn't happened before, or you're talking with someone who has a behavioral behavioral pattern that could become a problem in the future. It's not a problem now, but it could be a problem. Or feedback occurs when a mistake was made and they need to gain some insights. Okay, that would be feedback. Confrontation, on the other hand, is when you are attacking a pattern of behavior that's negative, or a piece of behavior that's so egregious, you have got to address it. If one of your workers just walked up to a client and just punched him in the face, that clearly would be a confrontation moment, right? Or the mistakes keep happening that are damaging the relationship. In other words, it hurts you so deeply when these things occur, you have to say, hey, I've got to give you a check at this point. We've got to work this out. So when we're having these conversations, whether we're doing feedback or whether we're doing confrontation, we have to be careful of certain types of language that we need to avoid. One of them, and by the way, this is very important if you're involved in long-term relationships or if you're married, you want to be sure you avoid these things because this can be poisonous to a marriage. Blaming. This is all your fault. You want to avoid that, even if it's true. You want to avoid that because then what's the person going to do? They're going to deny, deflect, defend, right? Name calling. You should never get down to an issue of name calling. You're an idiot. You're a moron. That never goes well. Sarcasm is not the place for these types of conversations. Well, aren't we, Mr. Intellectual? That doesn't help, and it puts people on the defensive. Threatening people, where you want to keep your job, or if I see that one more time, I'm divorcing you, blah blah blah. Those are you're doing Cliff, and what happens is it raises people's hackles, and they're like, oh yeah, I'll throw the gauntlet down. Let's go. I'll call your bluff. Exaggerating, where you say you always do this. And it's just simply not true, right? No one's that consistent. Where you're bringing up the past, it's sort of like you're mining the past. It's like, I remember what this is just like the time you did this. And so the person makes one mistake, but then you basically unload the whole basket or luggage of things that you've held in and didn't talk to them about, and you just basically garbage dump on them. That's bringing up the past. Or you try to do a public humiliation. Compliment in public, rebuke in private. Try to defend people's saving face. Help them save face so that they can maintain some level of dignity. Otherwise, their emotions will not allow you to continue the conversation. They'll stand there, but they won't listen to you like you would need them to. So how should we talk? If we have examples of how we shouldn't talk, how should we talk? Well, talk with people, not at them. And you kind of know the difference. Tell them specifically what you like about them or what you love about them. Don't just tell someone that you love them. Give them an example of why you love them. What did they do that brought joy to your life? Make sure you're truly listening to the other person that you're talking with. Ideally, these conversations occur in person. Try to avoid doing it online or over telephone, but sometimes that's not always possible, but you want to the extent that you can. Own your part of the problem. If you think that you have some part, maybe it's only 20%, own your part of the problem, because then you're trying to restore relationship. You're trying to improve the relationship and move your company forward. It's not just about winning. Do you want the relationship or do you want the win? And that's a tough question. We want to affirm the truth, but sometimes the relationship is going to be more important than you just sort of dotting that last I and trying to make sure that this person, that you force them to swallow what you're telling them. And also, when you're speaking, can you understand? Doesn't mean you agree, but can you understand the other person's point of view? When you have these difficult conversations, when you have these fierce conversations about deeply emotional issues, about important issues, you have to recognize that you can't always control what the results will be. That's what she means when she says, own the emotional wake of your words. A wake occurs when you're riding a boat. There's a wake of where the boat has displaced water and it creates a wave. That's called a wake. So when you have these difficult conversations with people, there's going to be emotional fallout from these conversations. Now, ideally, it's positive. It ends up moving you both forward. Sometimes, however, it ends the relationship. Think of someone that let's say they're a drug addict and you've been working with them for years and years and years and nothing's worked. And finally, you've had enough and you just have to move on. They could be calling you and complaining and you threw them under the bus, blah, 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 all the manipulative things that people who are drug addicts do. You have to sometimes just own that. It's like, well, I understand that this was hurtful to you. That's just the reality of it. Now, this is where it's not an excuse to be cruel. It's not an excuse to be mean. But sometimes you have to recognize that when you come to a firm conclusion where it's sort of like your line in the sand, it's not something you can give up, that's deeply seated with you, then you need to own the fact that there's consequences for that because you can't control what other people do. Always tell the truth. Tell what you believe to be true to the extent that you're aware of it. And that's important. You need to have honest conversations. It doesn't mean you're 100% right. It means that whatever you believe to be true, that's what you're saying. Is you're not trying to game the system. Well, I'm going to lie here and lie there and try to manipulate the whole thing. That's not what you're supposed to be. And then always remember, to the extent that you can, be kind. You want to try to help people maintain their dignity. I mentioned that multiple times, and you want to avoid those bad terms. You can have difficult conversations without name calling, without demeaning people, but just saying, this is my line in the sand, I've had enough. I can't do this anymore unless something changes. We want to be sure that we're reflecting on our own selves. We want to make sure that what we believe is true. And so this gets back to we want you to tell the truth, but we want you to think critically about what you believe. Do you have all the facts? Do you truly understand the other person's perspective? Or have you elevated your perspective into the total godlike truth? Now, you may be right, but you want to be sure you take that moment and really reflect about what you're doing and what you're saying. Are you right? Or are you partly right? So she says, we believe the stories we tell ourselves about others. That's a great little quote because it forces us Do we truly understand what this other person did? Reflect on your own biases. And this is something that's very hard for people to do that haven't gone through systematic education. Because in education, one of the things that happens is you have a teacher who has control over your grades, and they're giving you a different perspective, and you may not like their perspective, but you have got to at least understand their perspective in order to pass the class. And with people that haven't gone through academic training, this can be something that's very difficult for them to process. It's sometimes very hard for people to step out of their own perspective and look at other people's perspectives and ask themselves, am I right? Or can I at least appreciate the other person's and maybe work to find a way where we can both agree without compromising ourselves unnecessarily? That's hard work. It's easier just to pound the table. I'm the boss. I'm the husband. I'm in charge. Ugh. I'm take my billy club and bang it on the table or whatever. My caveman axe or whatever, and I'm going to just power through it. Well, that'll work, but it's going to have a lot of devastation in its wake. Always be critical of yourself before you are critical of others. Sometimes parents, for example, have trouble with their children because they have failed as a parent to discipline and be consistent in their discipline with children. And then they're shocked when the little buggers are hellions. Well, it's because, my dad used to say this all the time. He's amazed at how many parents lie to their children all the time. Let me give an illustration. You do that one more time and I'm going to do something about it. And of course the kid does it again. Nothing happens. Well, you just lied to your child. So don't be shocked when they keep pushing the boundaries because they're wanting to see when are you going to follow through with what you said, right? So this is an area where we need to be critical of ourselves before we begin judging others. You may have heard someone called Jesus who said we need to make sure we pluck the log out of our own eye before we pluck the sliver out of the other person's eye, right? Doesn't mean we can't judge other people. A lot of people misunderstand that, okay? A lot of pagans and people that don't understand what they think is Christianity. We can still judge people. We're going to do it all the time. But nevertheless, Jesus wants us to be sure that we're self-critical. If you're not a Christian, then look at some other tradition there. But nevertheless, be critical of yourself before you're critical of others. And you're going to find that these fierce conversations can be managed more effectively, carefully, and you'll have a better likelihood of a positive outcome rather than just simply relational destruction that so often happens when we have difficult conversations. Well, I hope you found that helpful, at least not for your business, hopefully for your personal relationships, because as a self-employed individual, you need to be sure that your home life is intact, because there's no use getting all of this money and working so hard and destroy your family at the same time. That's a Pyrrhic victory where it's just not worth the win. So I hope that was helpful for you. Again, my name is Stephen Van Tassel. You've been listening to Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek Podcast family. Do take a few moments, if you would, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell. Join us on Facebook, the Pest Geek Podcast Facebook. We'd love to have you. If you want to reach out to me, you can reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Would love to hear from you. And again, this is Living the Wildlife. Why is it Living the Wildlife? Well, because we want you to live the wildlife, not be the wildlife. Take care, everybody.